United States President Donald Trump's decision to target Canada, Mexico, and China with tariffs has caused major changes and concerns in the global economy. After the announcement of 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico and 10% tariffs on China, the three countries targeted by Trump reacted directly to the United States leader and focused on what he would do to get rid of this problem. Although Donald Trump postponed tariffs on Canada and Mexico, tariffs on China continued. Economic experts even suggested that tariffs of up to 60% had been imposed on some goods. The Beijing regime initially condemned these harsh tariffs, just like Canada and Mexico, and suggested that it would initiate legal proceedings. Then, China found a way out of the United States leader's tariffs.
Trump introduced punitive tariffs on China, as well as trying to rebalance the trade deficit.
They are moving their product away from China, and they're setting up shop in Mexico.
So can anyone really win a trade war? And what will the impact be on the rest of the world?
For China, this way out was through Mexico. But how did China create this route? How did China get rid of the United States tariffs through Mexico? We will now explore how the Beijing regime has leveraged its economic power in Mexico to avoid Trump's tariffs, what impact this has had on the United States, and where Mexico fits in. But first, please do not forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and give us a like to stay up to date with our content. First of all, it is important to consider the economic dynamics between the United States and Mexico before Donald Trump's tariff decision. For the first time in more than 2 decades, Mexico overtook China as the largest importer of goods to the United States. In 2023, Mexican imports to the United States reached $475 billion, about $20 billion more than the previous year. The drivers of this trend included rising trade tensions between Beijing and Washington, efforts to bring United States imports closer to home, and a growing Mexican manufacturing base. But as we mentioned, there was another factor at play. To avoid American tariffs, Chinese companies were using Mexico as a backdoor to the United States. One of these backdoors was the Alianza Industrial Park in Mexico. Located 250 kilometers from the United States border, the park is home to production facilities serving Mexico's fast-growing automotive industry. But in recent years, it has been growing rapidly, with a number of Chinese companies setting up shop. Chinese groups producing high-end auto parts are investing more than $1 billion in this park in the state of Coahuila to work alongside global auto industry giants, to the delight of Chinese executives at the center of the deals and local state officials. The changes at Alianza were seen as a symbol of closer ties that were poised to push Mexico to the center of Trump's trade war with China. In the last 3 years, the number of Chinese companies in industrial parks in Mexico has doubled. The number of Chinese companies in this industrial park has also exploded. In the Alianza Industrial Park, excavators and trucks work non-stop every day for a Chinese tire manufacturer and companies in other industries. A sign at the entrance to the park had a message in Mandarin and English welcoming another new company. Germany's Daimler Truck and multinational giant Stellantis had been building vehicles in adjacent facilities for more than a decade. On the surrounding land, suppliers from Europe and the United States produced everything from windows to wiring harnesses. Alianza, which housed all these activities, was one of several plants in Mexico with a growing Chinese presence that was trying to take advantage of the country's free trade agreement with the United States and Canada, known as the USMCA. This caught the attention of politicians in Washington and Ottawa, just as President-elect Donald Trump threatened the Mexican government with 25% tariffs. Emerging analysis shows that over the past few years, Chinese companies have become more deeply embedded in supply chains, developed stronger trade links, and increased production in Mexico. Connor Pfeiffer, Director of Congressional Relations at the United States national security think tank FDD Action, said that from a purely economic perspective, significant Chinese investment activity in Mexico should set alarm bells ringing in Washington, D.C. According to Connor Pfeiffer, Mexico is right here, and they had access to a very different United States market than some other countries. While Chinese companies are investing in many countries, including close neighbours like Vietnam, to diversify their supply chains, Mexico's proximity and central location to Trump's priorities on issues like trade access and immigration put it squarely in the line of fire. Trump's nominee for Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau have expressed concerns that China is using Mexico to circumvent tariffs. So the United States and Canada were aware of this situation. The USMCA, which supports trade between the three countries, is due for review in 2026 and was seen as likely to be central to China's current and future role in supply chains. Mexican government statistics show that investment from China and Hong Kong totaled $450 million last year, less than 2% of the total. But data from external research providers revealed that China was likely to be a more significant investor than official figures suggested. According to figures from real estate analytics company CILA, Chinese groups in Mexico are occupying twice as much industrial space as 3 years ago. Although they account for only 3% of leased industrial space, they have filled 7% of absorbed capacity since 2020, the third largest after United States and Mexican firms, according to the latest figures. Mexican business leaders note that while there has been growth in Chinese investment, it has come from a small base, and levels are much lower than in many South American countries. But China's growing presence and visibility is clearly emerging as a challenge for Mexico's new president, Claudia Sheinbaum, as she seeks to engage with Trump. It is likely that Claudia Sheinbaum does not really think that the sudden increase in Chinese presence is a flood, as the United States narrative suggests. But according to Juan Carlos Baker, director of Ansley Consultores, which manages foreign trade at Mexico's economy ministry, that does not mean they should ignore the real problem. The problem is that ZC Rubber, already China's largest automotive tyre manufacturer, is steadily increasing its presence in Alianza. The company's investment accounted for almost half of the $1 billion promised by Chinese businesses in the Alianza Industrial Park. When ZC Rubber began construction of its factory in Coahuila in August, state officials presented company representatives with a Mexican tapestry and a sculpture of the country's coat of arms featuring an eagle perched on a prickly pear cactus fighting a rattlesnake. A month later, when another Chinese company broke ground on its nearby factory, officials cut red ribbons and traditional Mexican dancers put on a show. The state government of Coahuila, which shares a 512-kilometer border with Texas, has been particularly proactive in attracting Chinese businesses. Governor Manolo Jimenez travelled to the Beijing Auto Show this year to tout the state's advantages, such as efficient links to the United States and successful security policies. Cesar Cantu, president of Grupo Alianza, which owns the park, said that whatever the country, companies want local integration where they do not usually deal with infrastructure. According to Cesar Cantu, this is not unique to Chinese, Japanese or American companies, but companies aiming to sell in the world's largest market had to locate near that market. The government's FDI data showed that the state was the second largest recipient of Chinese investment in 2023. This spending was part of a growing trend, but many experts believe that official FDI figures underestimated actual levels. Data from FDI markets supported this, suggesting that what was recorded was only a fraction of what was announced by Chinese companies. Rhodium Group consultants estimated in a recent report that the investment stock could be 6 times higher than the government's figures. This reflected well-known distortions and limitations in how FDI is counted, which poses a challenge for Mexico as it tries to address United States concerns and also decides which Chinese investments to allow or disallow due to unfair competition or national security fears. The undisclosed, behind-the-scenes figures made clear the true number of Chinese investments, where they came from, and who created this capital. In fact, there were numerous examples to prove this. For example, inside the Mexico Mart shopping center in downtown Mexico City, with its full name in Mandarin above the entrance, dozens of vendors were selling cheap Chinese imports. This was the case until a government raid last month that shut it down, as armed Marines stood guard outside. The move was widely understood as a signal to the United States that Mexico was willing to take tough measures against Chinese imports. But reducing them was no easy task. Mexico had become the United States' largest trading partner in 2023, as China's share of United States imports declined during the trade wars. The Mexican government therefore felt obliged to somehow reduce China's economic presence. This ACAB was seen as a turning point for an economy full of enthusiasm that jobs and factories from Asia could move to Mexico's near shore. At the same time, Mexico was importing more from China, and this fueled fears that Chinese companies seeking to avoid tariffs were using Mexico as an escape route from the United States. Rubio, Trump's nominee for Secretary of State, wrote a letter in September specifically warning about this. Rubio's letter included the following statements. Congress made a free trade agreement with Mexico, not China. Immediate action must be taken to prevent the Chinese Communist Party from exploiting the USMCA and weaponizing this important trade agreement. These statements were meant as a warning to Mexico and China. But are these warnings working now? Has China's trade volume in Mexico decreased? At Manzanillo, Mexico's largest port, which is currently undergoing a $2.7 billion expansion, more than 40% of the containers docking at the port come from China, according to data from shipping supply chain monitoring firm VesselBot. Container trade statistics. Data analysed by freight analytics platform Zenata shows that the number of 20-foot containers shipped from China to Mexico increased by 19% in the first 3 quarters of 2024 compared to the same period last year. However, Mexican analysts note that the United States and Canada still receive a lot of Chinese imports and investment, including inputs for the automotive sector. Enrique Dussel-Peters, director of the Center for China-Mexico Studies at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, said there is a deep integration. The political debate has not taken into account the economic and industrial reality. The Mexican government has continued to take steps to address this issue. Sheinbaum focused his public reactions on the plan to replace Chinese imports with Mexican products and emphasized the importance of the United States relationship without directly criticizing Beijing. The government is considering setting up a scheme to screen investments for national security concerns because, according to its president Claudia Sheinbaum, the Mexican government does not want to deceive anyone. Sheinbaum also notes that she currently has no strategic relationship with China and that her country's #1 priority is to work with the United States and Canada. Luis Rosendo Gutierrez, Mexico's Undersecretary of State for International Trade, echoes this assessment, suggesting that the country's trade volume with China has not reached crisis proportions. According to Luis Rosendo Gutierrez, the idea of China opening a backdoor through Mexico is a completely false narrative, given how low Chinese investment levels are and how imports are at similar or higher levels in the rest of North America. Of course, this whole narrative could change with the tariffs coming back into force after a month. Trump's tariffs, if implemented, could be devastating for Mexico, which relies on the United States to buy more than 80% of its exports. Donald Trump has shown that he is willing to use tariff threats not only to protect strategic domestic industries, but also for geopolitical leverage. While a tariff is conceptually simple, it is a tax on goods imported from a foreign country, and who bears the economic burden often depends on how national governments and companies respond to them. The biggest gains in Mexico's trade with the United States have been in the politically sensitive category of transportation and automobiles, which account for more than 1/3 of the growth in the country's overall share of United States imports. So Mexico will want to close its trade deficit normally after the tariffs, but how much sense it makes to do so with China is still up for debate. North American leaders are anxious to protect their national industries, with United States and Canadian auto unions complaining that their southern neighbour has been losing jobs for years and facing increased competition from China. Given the significant focus of the incoming administration and Congress on what China is doing economically around the world, this is likely to be a topic high on the agenda. We have said that there is a lot of evidence of China's presence in Mexico, which is very much on the agenda right now. It would be impossible to completely eradicate this incredible commercial presence in one fell swoop. Especially the auto manufacturing sector is at the center of concerns. Mexico's National Association of the Auto Parts Industry says that only 36 of the nearly 1,000 Chinese companies operating in the sector are active here. According to INA data, their exports to the United States increased by 50% between 2021 and 2023. The association's president, Francisco Gonzalez, referring to the most important group of suppliers to automakers, argues that they are coming here because of close sourcing, but that this is by no means a major new Tier 1 wave. According to Francisco Gonzalez, in certain cases, there was a clear invitation from the automakers that they needed a particular product. The Chinese auto industry wing probably took advantage of this opening. Some United States auto manufacturing jobs also sometimes depend on parts made in Mexico by Chinese firms. Given all this, it seems that no country, not the United States, not Canada, not Germany, can cut the umbilical cord with China 100%. United States companies such as General Motors are some of the biggest importers of Chinese products into Mexico. 1 in 5 cars sold domestically is now made in China, like GM's popular Chevrolet Aveo. But given the economic threat to the American auto industry and the potential security risk posed by connected vehicles from China, the biggest fear in the United States is that Chinese electric vehicle makers like BYD and Chery will settle in Mexico and sell more volume or even try to export. No factories have yet been announced, although they are looking for locations in the States. This is why President Trump has taken notice of this in the campaign. The United States may see the presence of automakers and other Chinese firms more broadly as a problem, including the telecommunications operator Huawei. If a significant percentage of Mexicans or Americans living in Mexico use Chinese-linked cars, this could eventually become a major concern for the United States. Many of the concerns that the United States has expressed about Huawei will somehow be amplified going forward if a large part of the future tech economy in Mexico is dominated by Chinese connected devices. As Trump's second term draws to a close, Mexico is likely to face this issue even more, and the United States is likely to feel the effects of China's efforts to take over almost all of its industries. So what can the United States and Mexico do together to block this Chinese trade sphere? The United States president-elect has developed an unexpected bond with Sheinbaum's populist predecessor, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who shares his transactional approach to politics. But another unexpected challenge came from the usually friendly Canada. Prime Minister Trudeau and other politicians have indicated that they are open to kicking Mexico out of the USMCA because of concerns about China. Canada's statement surprised Mexicans, but Trudeau and other leaders are also thinking about their own auto parts sector before the election in 2025. Sheinbaum initially reacted coldly to Trump's tariff threat. Since then, the two leaders have met, and Trudeau has pledged to continue policies that prevent migrants from reaching the border and has considered repairing damaged security cooperation. He has made it clear that the United States is a priority, but if you remember, he met with both former President Joe Biden and President Xi Jinping at the G20, which was seen as a sign that he wanted to continue working with both of them. The current President, Trump, described his meeting with Sheinbaum as great, but President-elect Trump has not yet withdrawn or postponed his threat of 25% tariffs, and the 2026 review of the USMCA is looming. It is now thought that Mexico needs to take a tougher stance against China's growing commercial presence. If the issue is not addressed, the crisis between the United States and Mexico could escalate further. In the semi-arid desert of Coahuila, thousands of workers on assembly lines continue to produce pickup trucks and pickups for export to the United States. But uncertainty around bilateral relations hangs over Alianza and other industrial sites in Mexico. At the moment, it is clear that the tariff situation between the United States and Mexico favors China. The Beijing regime is likely to use the tariff crisis to increase its commercial presence in Mexico Much more in the future. Time will tell how the United States and Mexico will react. Thank you for watching.